Okay. I'm so excited to be here. Although I'm sad, so many of my Washingtonian friends had to go back to Washington because there are very few flights from here. So I'm sad they're missing it. But if you're on camera, hi. There's some of y'all watching from your cars. Hopefully you're not driving and watching. I'm excited to be here for a number of reasons. So I'm glad. I always come early, and it was really important to me to hear the sub-panel. Thank you so much for sharing. I got so much out of that. I like to just get a sense of the people I'm talking to. My career has not been in law, although that's what I thought I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. But I'd like to just get a sense. In the last week, I have been with fifth graders. I have been with 12th graders. I've been with Black educators in Missouri. I've been in South Dakota, and I've been here. So every day is a little bit different. People ask, what do you do next Friday? I don't know. I can take about 24 hours at a time right now. I do know that I'll be flying home tomorrow, and I get a day of rest. A day of rest. I've been on the road since last Wednesday. But I get to share my story with you because I believe that if we all were to tell our stories, I believe we could find connection with each other in ways that we don't right now. And so I lead with the telling of my story and being really vulnerable because I think that's what we need to get back to our humanity. How many of you think as you look at social media, as you look at this country, we've lost a little bit of our humanity? Yeah. I just did a TikTok video about that yesterday. So if you want to follow me on TikTok, Afro Educator. But I talk about we have lost our humanity, and I think the only way back to it is truth and vulnerability. I think that's the only way. And so I think we need to be willing to tell the truth. Do you know our story collectively is good, bad, and ugly? It is. It's not all good and it's not all bad, and it's somewhere in the middle. But I think we have to be really honest about our story, our collective story, the story of the system that you work in. We have to be honest about that. And then we have to be willing to be vulnerable and share our stories and then listen to the stories. And I appreciated what so many of the panelists talked about in doing listening tours and thinking about who is not at the table. How do you expand that table to make sure you're listening? And so I really want to model that for us today as a way to close your conference. So I want to read, just because it is Black History Month, and I have been on the road for the last month talking about Dr. King. I had 15 assemblies in 10 days. 15 assemblies with children. And y'all, it's a wonder I have hair left. 15 assemblies, and children are fun, but you are so right. They will tell you, they keep it real. And I get lots of funny responses from children. And I spend most of my time in schools that have never seen a Black adult before in person. So I've been called a clown, been told my hair is fuzzy. And I just chalk that up to they've just never seen anybody like me. So we're going to show grace to them, and we're going to educate them. And so I spend a lot of time in predominantly white spaces where kids have never seen. And so I assume ignorance, not malicious intent. I'm going to say that again. I assume ignorance, not malicious intent. And I go into spaces and I work really hard to disrupt some narratives. And I love it. It's my favorite season. January is my absolute favorite season of the year because I know I'm going to get into spaces that I may not ever get into were it not that schools are required to do a Martin Luther King assembly. And it's my goal to get my foot in the door to come back. Not because of money, because y'all, they don't pay well. But because the work is not one assembly. Just like the work today is not one speech, is not the work. The work is after the speech. It's why I wrote the book, because I realized that one speech can tickle your ears and maybe move your heartstrings. I hope your heartstrings will be moved today. But the speech is not it, and it's why I'll stay after and talk to people, because that's the work. The connection is the work. But I want to open with a piece of a speech that Dr. King gave. So many people want to just read the I Have a Dream speech, which, by the way, there's a whole speech to that. It's not just the last little bit, which was, by the way, Mahalia Jackson is the one that prompted him to do that little bit. But the part, y'all need to, I challenge you, homework, because I'm a teacher by trade. Go back and read the beginning of that speech. That's not a nice speech. We like to take those little bits that we like that tickle our ears. But there's a book that he wrote right before he was assassinated called Where Do We Go From Here? And I think every one of you in the court system should read it because he's really conflicted. He's really conflicted. And to be honest, I read it in 2020 and I thought, oh my gosh, is he here right now? Because everything in that book speaks to things we're walking through right now in this moment. But I want to read just a piece of a speech that he gave. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggles. The tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Without persistent effort, time itself becomes an ally of the insurgent and primitive forces of irrational emotionalism and social destruction. In other words, we got to keep at it. We got to keep at it. We can't just, I think about what happened in this city. I'm going to share a little bit about my connection to this city, but I think about what happened in this city in the summer of 2020. And then the backlash that came literally months later. Because I sit in education spaces and do a lot of my work in education spaces, I have watched us go backwards years and how we're able to even talk about history right now. And part of that happened because people watched the marches and they said, yay, we've arrived. No, we have not arrived. We got to stay in the game. And it takes lots of people linking arms and staying in the game together. You can't do this work by yourself. So I'm going to share a little piece of my why story today because I believe when we're really clear about our why we do the work we do. So I want you to be thinking about your why. Why do you do the work you do for the courts? Where you do it? I think your location is really important and the job that you do is really important. So why do you do the work you do? And here's why I think the why is really important. You may not be surprised, but I, as a ball player, did you know there's a basketball court in this hotel? I was very excited, although it has a sign that says there's a conference happening here, you cannot play. I was like, how do y'all have a basketball court and I am not allowed to play on it? But not every tall black lady is a basketball player, but I am a ball player. 40 years I played basketball. 40 years. I just hung up the shoes a couple years ago because I realized that I am at the age now where my brain says spin here and my body's like, oh no. We're not spinning here. So I needed to hang up the shoes because anytime I got close to a court, I'd want to get on the court and would just do harm to myself and others. But I was a ball player. And so I think a lot, and you're going to hear a lot of sports analogies here. My husband's a head football coach, so I think about sports a lot. But here's why the why is really important. When you are clear about why you're in a place, why you're on the court, why you're in this room, when things get hard, you will continue to work hard to stay on the court, to stay in the place where you are. If you're not clear about your why and your why is not big enough, when things get hard, you will either walk away or you'll stay and just survive. When you're really clear about your why, you will do the work it takes to stay and to thrive. When you're not so clear, you will walk away. And I think the more dangerous thing is when people don't walk away and they just stay and they're just going through the motions. How many of you have ever been there? I'm just going to own that I have been. So I want to share my why story, but I want you to be thinking about your own why story because I am trying to model for you what I want to invite you to do. One of the things I believe as an athlete, as a coach, I'm not coaching right now because I'm on the road too much, but I try to coach when I'm home. So my girls still love me, but I've been home like for only 5 games this season. But they text me, Miss Jones, watch the film, and we need some help. So I am still a coach. One of the things that I believe and why I think my girls are still reaching out for help even though I'm not home, I don't ask anyone to do what I'm not willing to do. I think we have way too many leaders asking people to do what they're not willing to do. I'm going to invite you to get a little uncomfortable today. You know how I started my day today? I ran 5 miles today. I'm about to be 52 years old. I ran 5 miles with an 8-minute, 37-second mile time. I didn't do that because, part of it's about fitness, for sure. But the other part of it is, y'all, I hate running without a ball. Who loves running in here? I know there's some of you. Yes. I don't understand you. I ran with the basketball for 40 years. I ran with the soccer ball for 20 years. I do not understand people that like to be on a treadmill or like in the woods. I don't understand it. And I do it every other day. I run. So I'm training for a half marathon right now. I'm not running that half marathon because I like running. I don't understand y'all that like running. It doesn't make any sense to me. I am running this half marathon because the work that I do is uncomfortable. And I can't ask you to be uncomfortable if I'm not willing to be uncomfortable. So running for me is the practice of pushing through discomfort. I told y'all I just ran an 8-minute, 37-second. That's a pretty good mile time for 5 consecutive miles at 52 years old. My goal is to get to 8 minutes. That's my goal. Because I got to stretch myself. And so I am not asking you to do something I'm not willing to do. But yet, can I tell you that first mile sucks every stinking time I run? Anybody else, any runners here feel that way? Like the first mile is just hard. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I could be taking a nap right now. Why am I out here doing this thing? I'm not getting paid to be here. But if I can get to mile 2 and get in a rhythm, then I can get to 3 and 4 and 5 today. And I sprint the last 100 yards. Doesn't matter where I am. I will always find that extra. And I'm an Orange Theory kind of freak right now. I did not go to Orange Theory because the gym here was just too nice to not use. But in Orange Theory, they're like, come on, all out. That's me. So I'm picturing my Coach Q, all out, Aaron. And I sprinted that last little 100 yards today. But I do that because I am practicing pushing through discomfort. I want to invite you to embrace that today as we talk. So there are 3 postures that I talk about in my book. I do a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work all over the country. I started mostly in schools, but now the pandemic cost me everything I did. I was a classroom teacher for 15 years. I was our assistant state superintendent of schools for 4 years in Washington State. I then was an administrator for another 10 years. And then made the crazy decision to run for statewide office. Who does that? Don't do that, okay? I had never run for anything ever in my life, and I decided we're gonna go for broke. And I became the first Black woman in my state to run for any state office. I lost that race by 1 point. Y'all, as a ball player, to lose by 1 point sucks. And can I tell you, when the pandemic hit, I was like, hallelujah! I got saved by 1 point. As my husband, who's a teacher, reminds me every day, honey, you are not running schools in a pandemic. We are so grateful. So sometimes your losses open doors to other opportunity. But I lost all of my education work on March 12th of 2020 when school shut down in Washington. Every single contract I had disappeared in 24 hours. Terrifying. I didn't work on salary for a school anymore. I was working on my own. I had consulting contracts with 6 or 7 school districts, and all of that was gone. We had a kid at USC in graduate school, $75,000 a year. We had another kid at Central Washington University. And suddenly I went from making administrator money to 0 overnight. Most terrifying moment of my entire life. And I remember on March 12th, my husband had just learned school shut down, so now he was not going to be going to work, but he had just gotten a bump in pay, and he'd just been offered the head football coach job, so he was pretty secure financially. And remember turning to him in bed and saying, honey, I just lost everything that I do, and I have nothing to offer. And here's what my husband, who we will celebrate our 30th wedding anniversary this summer. We made it! I didn't think we were going to for a while, but we made it. We had been married for 27 years at the time, and I turned to him and said, honey, I found out today I've lost every contract. Every speaking gig, every conference has been canceled. Every school event has been canceled. I got nothing. And here's what my husband said to me, really wise. He said, honey, you've been doing for a long time. I want to invite you to just be for a little bit. Y'all, that's love. I just cried. He went right to sleep. And I laid in the bed. I was like, oh, that's just so beautiful. I get to just be. March 13th is my mother's birthday. My mother lives about 10 minutes from me. My mother's mother died of pneumonia when I was 9 years old. My mother gets pneumonia every year. So guess who I could not see on her birthday? And I remember driving to my mom's house and leaving her present at the door and calling her and saying, Mom, okay, I cleaned the package. Yeah, because remember, like at the very beginning, we thought we're going to die if we get anywhere close. And maybe I touched somebody that had it and I'm going to kill my mom. Right? So I cleaned the package. I said, Mom, I left your gift bag up at the door. I'm sitting out in my car. And she came outside and I'm sitting like as far as me to the camera from her because I didn't know, right? I'm not trying to kill my mom on her birthday. And I'm singing happy birthday to you. And we're both crying. And how many of you thought about your mortality in a different way and your families? Yeah. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my parents. I just knew I was. Like I had this moment of real fear. And then I just remembered what my husband said, just be, honey, just be. And I spent Saturday just like thinking, wow, how am I going to be in this moment? And just because I'm a teacher, I want to use a little visual here. I want everybody, even those of you watching, unless you're driving, don't do this if you're driving, but even you watching, I want everybody to put your hands out in front of you like you're holding water. If you've ever been to a stream and you're cupping water to drink, I want you to picture in your hands, what are the things that you're good at? Could be skills you've developed. It could be talents that you have. It could be something extracurricular you do. What are the things that you're good at? You don't have to be the best at them. What are the things you love to do that you're pretty good at? I want you to picture those in your hands. Okay, you can put your hands down. I knew, so on Saturday, March the 14th, I knew what was in my hands. Because I had run for office in 2016, I had 5,000 people following me on social media. I knew that I had 2 computers. I had just learned how to go Facebook Live. And I love to teach. So I said, okay, I'm watching my teacher friends. They're not allowed to teach in Washington State. It was a whole month before teachers were allowed by law to go online because there were some lawsuits in the works. And so I was watching my friends on Facebook kind of panic. My teacher friends, like, what are we going to do for our kids? And so for anyone who thinks teachers teach because of money, so I'm watching my teacher friends lose their minds because, our babies, what are we going to do about it? How are we going to support them? And they're panicking online. But I'm also watching families try to figure out, especially families that have 4, 5, 6 kids. Like, what are we going to do? Everybody's saying, what are we going to do? And what I said, what's in my hand is I have a computer and I have this love for teaching. So on March 16th, that Monday, I decided I'm going to go Facebook Live and I'm going to read books out loud to children every morning at 8:30. Now, I happen to speak 4 languages fluently. You'll find out later why. I'm a walking disruption of narratives, y'all. But I speak English, Dutch, French, and Spanish fluently. And so I would read on Monday and Wednesday, I'd read in English. Tuesday, Thursday, I read in Spanish. Friday, I read in French and Dutch, which I got the most viewers then because I think they're like, the black lady with the hair is reading in this language. We are not real sure what that is. But I got lots of attendees on Fridays. But I would read every morning at 8:30. And then at 9 o'clock, I did a free class for educators on thinking about equity in your classroom spaces. Did that for an hour. And then I had a class from 11 to noon for children above the age of 9. And we called it Becoming a Change Agent. And I did that for 81 days in a row. It was my way to give back. It was my way to give. I didn't ask for money for it. I just said, this is what I can do. How many of you sometimes feel overwhelmed when you look at the problems in the world? Right? You just feel overwhelmed. And I said, okay, I can't solve this pandemic, but what I can do, what's in my hand, I'm going to give. And so I just gave. And then in week 2, the beginning of week 2, I get this message on Facebook from a college student who had been my high school student. He said, Miss Jones, have you heard of this thing called Zoom? I said, no. Now, since then, I've done 2,000 plus hours on Zoom. But at the time, I said, what's a Zoom? And he said, well, in my college class, we've been doing Zoom. And that way, not just your students could see you, you could see your students, Miss Jones. And I think you need to get a Zoom account. And so I got a Zoom account and I started going on Zoom. And then I figured out how to do Zoom live on Facebook too. So the Facebook community could still stay involved. And then, of course, Ahmaud Arbery was killed. And then Breonna Taylor. And then right here in Minnesota, George Floyd. And it was really painful to watch that because, a little bit of history, I was born in 1971 out of the body of a white woman in a St. Paul hospital. That white woman obviously conceived me with a not white man because this is all mine. I'm a little pale right now because I live in the Northwest. But my mother was told she needed to leave me at the hospital. So I started the first day of my life in the orphanage. The only sheet of paper I have about my parents says name of mother, Norwegian woman, name of father, Negro man. And I would be sent to the Children's Home Society, never to meet either my biological mother or father. At 3 months old, the orphanage was visited by 2 educators from northern Minnesota. Where are my Minnesota folks at? Where are y'all at? Where are y'all at? Okay, you were everywhere. Okay. So sometimes I cannot say where my parents are from because people are like, huh? Michigan? Because my parents are from Grand Rapids and Coleraine. Keep going north, okay? And they are so white, they're clear, okay? My parents are both Scandinavian people. They're so white you can see their veins through their skin. So I say they're clear, they're not white. But this couple would show up at the Children's Home Society when I was 3 months old and ask the director, who are the babies nobody wants? That's who we want to adopt. Now, unfortunately, 2023 is not a whole lot different than 1971 because about 80% of Black babies still are not being adopted. But my parents would decide that day, we're adopting a Black baby. And my dad tells the story of walking through the nursery and seeing me and saying, she's the one we want. Y'all, I was chosen by a family. I don't see myself as rejected. I was chosen intentionally by a family. But do you know the next day, my parents would be disowned by both sides of their good Christian families. Disowned. Like, why couldn't you just have adopted one of ours? Why'd you have to go adopt one of them? Right here in Minnesota. And my dad, who is one of the most courageous humans on the planet, also the nerdiest math teacher you will ever meet. My dad is so nerdy. He had a pocket protector. Some of y'all don't know what that is. That's okay. Pocket protector into the 90s, y'all. The 90s. Some of y'all who are under 50 don't know what that is, but just trust me. Nerdy math teacher. And also the most courageous person I know because he decided that Christmas, I was about 6.5 months old, I'm going to take her to meet my parents and they will love her. And he combed my hair out with a white people comb. Because that's what he had. Put my best dress on me and brought me up to Grand Rapids where my grandparents lived. And as the story goes, my grandfather took one look and said, she's beautiful. How could we not accept her? Narratives, right? They'd been hearing narratives about us that were not true. And all it took was that connection, the physical connection for him to say, oh my gosh, she's beautiful. And I'd be given the blessing, or my family would be given the blessing. And what's really amazing and why I don't believe in accidents in my life, my cousins and I are all 6 feet taller. We are all basketball players. We've all been basketball coaches. We are all teachers. And we all sing. Really beautiful, except for they are all clear and blonde. Although they're all gray now. I get some help here. But we are all very much alike. And in fact, I was able to fly up here early before this conference. I was able to fly to Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where my cousin now teaches at a university, and hang out with him for the first time in a really long time, and my uncle. But understand, my parents adopted me at a time when having a Black baby was not cool. And if you're from Minnesota, my parents were forced to move to Stillwater, Minnesota, because North just was not real welcoming. And so my dad taught at Stillwater Junior High School for probably about 10 years, because I think he was there and then came back. But I remember very clearly a story about race when I was 4 years old. People ask, how early were you when you realized you were a different color from your parents? Do you know everyone sees color, even babies can distinguish between color. Seeing color is not the problem. It's the story we tell about the color we see that becomes the problem. So I'm sure I saw my mom. I told y'all, they're clear. Like, we are very definitely very different skin colors. I'm sure I saw and noticed their skin color, but that meant nothing because it didn't mean anything to us. And then, when I was 4 years old, I went to a birthday party. My friend Melanie's house down the street. And understand, I was the only Black person in our entire town, except, if those of you from Minnesota, there was the prison right outside of town. So I want you to think about the stories. The only Black people in Stillwater were in the prison outside of town, and then me. So for the most part, children never saw another Black person. And I remember being at this party, I'm 4 years old, and this little girl, Melanie, puts her arm next to mine and she says, "Erin, why are you always dirty? Why doesn't your mother ever give you a bath?" And that sounds horrible today when I say it out loud. But I want you to imagine, if you have never seen a brown person as a child, what is your only association with brownness? Dirt. And here's the worst part of that story. I would run to her bathroom because I suddenly had a revelation at 4 years old. Maybe my mom just has the wrong soap. Maybe if I use Melanie's soap, I can have skin like hers. And I try to wash the brown off my skin. And of course, it doesn't go anywhere. And I run back home crying. My father decides that day, I told you he's incredibly courageous. He decides that day, we're not raising her in Minnesota. About 3 months later, he would come home from teaching, and he would announce to our house, "We're moving to the Netherlands." Not Atlanta, not New York, not Seattle, not LA, the Netherlands. Now, she talked about The Hague. That's where I moved, to The Hague, the Netherlands. But I want you to imagine being a little kid hearing the Netherlands. Where's Neverland, y'all? What movie is that from? I thought we were going to go live with Peter Pan and Captain Hook. Like, this sounded like the most amazing thing ever. And my dad was like, "No, honey, we're going to the country across." I'm 4, almost 5. I don't know where Europe is. I live in Minnesota. I don't know what an ocean is. We are as far from the ocean as could possibly, the big lakes, but I don't know what an ocean is. And so my dad goes to the Minnesota library, and he decides to rent a film about the Netherlands. Now, what should you always do before you show a film to small children? Always watch it first. I don't care if it's from the public library. Now, it's worse than you can imagine, but it's not what you imagine, okay? You ready? You ready? I'm going to paint a little picture for you. So the Netherlands, Netherland means low country, low land, Atlantic Ocean here, land here. Atlantic Ocean, land. There is a wall called a dike that is supposed to go around the entire country to hold the ocean from the land, except this movie was about the day the dike broke. And in the opening 10 seconds of this movie about the country we are moving to, there is a storm on the ocean, beats against and breaks it in the opening scene of the movie. And all I remember, and I remember this very clearly, and we actually found a version of this film on YouTube, is cows swimming in the ocean and people standing on top of rooftops screaming. And my dad's like, "Turn it off, oh my gosh." You know, it was too late. It was too late. We're gonna die in this country. My dad is bringing us to Neverland. This is not good, underwater. But we would get on a plane and fly to the Netherlands in 1976. Now, what I didn't know that really matters today is the day before my dad accepted the job at the American School of The Hague in the Netherlands, he was offered another job at the American School of Tehran in Iran. Especially in the context of this moment. And my dad, when he was done with the interview, the superintendent of schools offered him the job and then realized, wait, I didn't leave you any time to ask questions. What questions do you have? And my dad knew that the American School of Tehran was probably there because of oil. That's why Americans were in Tehran at the time. And when he put two and two together, he said, okay, oil, that means Texas, Oklahoma. I got a question for you. I got a little black kid. I'm about to bring a little black kid. How do you think your community is going to handle that? This was not the question the superintendent was prepared to answer. And my dad said he paused for a moment and then said, well, I wouldn't have a problem with it, but my families might. And my father said, I could never work for you. Click. But I think about that. What if my dad had not been courageous? We would have ended up at the American School of Tehran. And if you know anything about Iranian history, in 1979, that school was taken over. The Americans were held hostage, and that's where we would have been. But my dad was really courageous and said, no, we're not doing that. And so I ended up at the American School of The Hague. And the American School of The Hague serves all the lawyers at the United Nations Court, at The Hague World Court. So here I am, this once orphaned little black girl, going to a school with powerful lawyers' children. And all of the ambassadors, their children went there too. So did Microsoft Europe's children, Shell Europe, Conoco Europe. School today costs $30,000 a year for kindergarten. But I went for free because that was one of the benefits of teaching there. And so here I was, this little once orphaned kid, suddenly sitting at a desk next to very powerful people's children. And that would begin to shape me. The first thing I knew as a little kid, even though my school was in English, we lived in community with other Dutch people. And even though the Dutch loved to speak English, I was determined as a little girl, 5 years old, I will learn to speak Dutch and I will learn to speak it well. I will learn to speak it with the Dutch accent. And so I was determined by the time I was 7, I was fluent in Dutch. I did not want people to assume I was American. I wanted them to just speak to me like I was Dutch. And then at 9 years old, I would have a really profound encounter with a classmate of mine. Her name was Yael. Yael was the Israeli ambassador's daughter. This is 1980. If you remember Israel in 1980, they were in conflict with another people group that is still in conflict today, the Palestinians. Except it's before the internet. So if a bomb went off in Tel Aviv or anywhere else in the region, we would not know for weeks who was still alive. Imagine being a little kid and your family is in the middle of a war zone. And Yael would come to class and she would be crying some days because she wasn't sure if her grandma and aunties and cousins were still okay. And my heart broke for Yael as a 9-year-old kid. And I said, okay, what can I do to help my friend? I can learn her story. Back to storytelling again. And so I began to learn the story of Israel and Palestine. I said, okay, what else can I do? I can learn to speak her language. And so as a weirdo, I'm still a weirdo, I spent lunchtime learning to speak Hebrew. Everybody else is out in the playground. I am learning to speak and write Hebrew. Because I figured if I'm going to really show up for her, I want to be able to speak her language. And then in December of 1980, there was a PTA meeting that my parents dragged me to. This is the danger of being a teacher's kid. You get dragged to all kinds of teacher meetings. And my plan was to sit at the back of the room and just read a book. But I get to the library and I realize Yael's father is sitting at the main table, and I know this is a meeting I need to pay attention to. And as they introduced the people sitting around the table, guess who else is there? The Palestinian ambassador, because his child is a second grader at our school. And so you have two men whose countries are at war sitting at the same table to talk about the education of their children. And I had this revelation that day, oh my gosh, if these men could sit here and talk about education, I bet I could get them to talk about peace. You know, I was 9 years old. I told you I was a weirdo. And I went back the next day and I found my friend from Turkey who I knew spoke Arabic, and I said, do you have any baby Arabic books? I think I also need to learn to speak Arabic. I was 9 years old. And I began to learn Hebrew and Arabic. And then in February of 1981, our principal gets a call from the president of Egypt. His name is Anwar Sadat. You may have heard of him. They were in the middle of a civil war that would eventually cost him his life, but they were in the middle of a civil war, and his wife had a dream one night. If I could just do assemblies for small kids about peace, the power of peace, we could stop war around the world. She had this dream. She had a friend named John Denver, and she said, John could come sing, and I could tell my story, and then we could engage little kids in talking about how to be more peaceful. And Mr. Sadat, President Sadat, called our principal and said, my wife has this idea. Can she come test this out with your kids? Was he going to say no to her, to him, to a president? No, he was not saying no. So we find out in a week, Mrs. Sadat and John Denver are coming. And our choir rushed to prepare leaving on a jet plane to sing with John Denver. I did not understand at 9 years old how big a deal that was, but I got to sing with John Denver at 9 years old. And then, yes, it was pretty powerful. I learned later how important that was, but she would speak. And when she was done, she asked the fourth grade teachers, who are the children most likely to change the world? John and I would like to take 3 of them to lunch. And guess who got chosen to have lunch with John Denver and Mrs. Sadat? This one. And I would sit at a little round, like cafeteria, plastic table with John Denver on one side and Mrs. Sadat on the other. And I remember, we are 9 years old, so I don't know how many of you have raised 9-year-olds, but I've raised 9-year-olds and I've taught fourth graders. They're thinking about Minecraft and Roblox and TikTok videos. And she asked us, how are you going to change the world? And my arm went right up and I said, I am going to solve the Middle East crisis. I'm learning to speak Arabic and Hebrew, and someday I'm going to broker peace between Israel and Palestine. And she should have laughed at me, but she did not. She looked at me and she said, you, Erin, are a world changer. Can I tell you, when a president's wife looks at you and says, you are, it matters. What we say to young people matters. How we speak into them, we can either speak life or death into young people. And that day, she spoke life into me, and I knew I'm a world changer. And I would go back to my teacher the next day, and I would say to Mrs. Parlier, who was probably my favorite teacher ever, Mrs. Parlier, Mrs. Sadat told me yesterday I'm a world changer. What do I need to do now? Because teachers are supposed to have the answers to all things. And Mrs. Parlier, because she was a badass, reached into her desk drawer without even batting an eyelash, and she pulled out a packet of 50 pages of fractions. Fractions. Now, for a long time, I wondered why fractions, but now I realize, having been a teacher, it's what she had in her desk drawer. But she gave them to me, and she said, do these, as if they were magic, world-changing documents. And I went home that night, and I did all 50 pages of fractions, and I came back the next day, and I was like, okay, what now? And she's reading through. She said, did you really do? I said, you told me to do 50 pages of fractions. I followed directions. And do you know, she would give me 1,000 pages of math problems that year. How do I know? Because when I got married in 1993, my mom came over for the wedding and went back home, and she's cleaning out my bedroom, and she said, honey, there's this box of 1,000 pages of math problems under your bed. Can you explain what was happening with that? I said, Mom, I was changing the world, okay? But here's what I learned in that I share everywhere I go, because it's lessons that I've held on to for my entire life. Do you know it's really easy to be average? Anybody can be average. All it requires is that you show up. Show up on your job. Show up wherever. Anybody can do that. Being great is a choice that you make. It's not about where you're born. It's not about how much money you have. It's not even about your talents. It's about how you use that time, how you use those talents. And what Mrs. Parlier taught me that year as a fourth grade kid is, man, I'm going to take the little bit that's in my hands and I'm going to invest it. I'm going to work really hard. And I made a decision for the rest of my life to live that out, to choose greatness at every opportunity. How did that translate? I got to middle school and then high school, I became the first freshman in high school to make 3 varsity teams. Now, it didn't hurt that I was 6 feet tall at 12. But I tell people all the time, my son is 6'4", and he's a horrible basketball player. He's just not, I don't know how a college football player and me produced a non-athletic child, but we managed that. Just being tall is not what made me freshman varsity material. I was always that kid before season. I was running. I was out on the court shooting free throws. I was out on the soccer field, on the field by myself, shooting on the goal. I made a choice as a little kid. I am going to choose greatness every day in everything that I do. And I knew because I was watching my parents, the friends of my parents who were lawyers at the United Nations World Court, I was watching them. My freshman year, our school got to represent Israel in the Model United Nations, the largest Model United Nations in the world. We actually host for a week students from all over the world. Our school shut down for a week, and we would host them at the actual United Nations, and we would get to represent, every year, our school would get to represent 2 of the largest countries, and Israel was the country that was chosen when I was a freshman. Who trained us? The Israeli ambassador trained us on policy. My sophomore year, we got Palestine. Who trained us? The ambassador for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, whose kid went to our school. I got to be around very powerful people, and as I got more advanced in high school, I thought, okay, how do I really want to change the world? I need to go to law school. And so in my mind, if I'm going to get to law school, I can't just go to any law school. In my mind, Harvard was the place to go because that's where most of the lawyers at the UN had gone. Even those that were from other countries, they'd all gone to Harvard. So in my mind, I got to get to Harvard. And I would get my acceptance letter from Princeton in March of 1989. I thought I could do Princeton and then go to Harvard. I don't know that you would do that, but in my 18-year-old mind, I could do that. But what did Princeton assume about me when they saw my name and the name of my school? White and rich. And Princeton, with my 3.9 GPA, 4 languages fluently, 11 advanced placement courses, captained by my senior year of 3 varsity teams, Princeton gave me a $1,000 scholarship. It was like a slap in the face. I had worked my behind off. And it was a season, y'all can't appreciate this probably, but where you couldn't just call Princeton and like today, we just call, get on a cell phone, send an email. There was no internet. There was no calling from overseas. So I can remember the night that I got my letter from Princeton. My dad was sitting in the dining room, and I could tell somebody had died, just his whole body language. Somebody had died. And he said, Erin, I need you to come back to the dining room. And he had all my Princeton paperwork in front of him. And it's the first time I ever saw my father cry. He's from northern Minnesota, y'all. No crying here. No smiles either, but no crying. And my dad sat me down at the table, and the first tear, he said, I'm so proud of you, honey. You did everything you were asked to do and more, but we got your financial aid paperwork. And I suspect they didn't look at your financial aid forms to see that you're not a rich kid. And we can't afford a $1,000 scholarship. You can't go. And he burst into tears and just held me. He said, honey, you've worked so hard and we're so proud of you. And he says to this day, I feel horrible. I said, Dad, that was not on you. You did everything you could to give me a great life. It still hurts him today. But I would have to say no to Princeton. About 2 weeks later, I got a letter from a place called Bryn Mawr College, which is right outside of Philly. And it's actually technically the sister college to Princeton. So all of the Ivies were designed for men in the 1800s. Women went to the sister schools. And Bryn Mawr was the sister college, and they offered me a 70% tuition waiver. And Dad was like, yeah, we're going to do that. Now, here's what I say to any of you who has teenage children. Who has teenage children here? Okay. Little lesson from one mom to another. One mom to parents out there. Do not say yes to a college until you have visited said college. Because the brochure always looks awesome. Okay? In my mind, the brochure looked beautiful, and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, you know, Will Smith was from Philadelphia. And that's where they said the college was, Philadelphia. So in my mind, I thought I'm going to go live like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And then Bill Cosby is from Philly. That has a whole different context today. But at the time, I loved Felicia Rashad, and I wanted to be a lawyer like her. And so in my mind, I imagined Cosby Show. I'm going to go live like Felicia Rashad. I even went and got my hair cut like her. That lasted about a day. But I was trying. I had studied American history, by the way. My white Scandinavian parents decided when I was in the 10th grade, Erin should know about the history of people who look like her. And so one weekend, they had gone out and traveled to every American bookstore in Western Europe. They bought me all the things. James Baldwin, every book by James Baldwin, Maya Angelou, Zora Neale Hurston, Alice Walker. Links, just all of it. I got just boxes of books. And my Scandinavian mom made me a promise, I will read every book with you. I need to learn too. And so I came to the United States having understood about American history and thinking it was history. Because I'd also studied the civil rights movement. So in my mind, slavery, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, civil rights, Will Smith, Cosby Show. And I get here in the first week of August to play soccer. I'm here a week early to do soccer preseason and land in Philadelphia airport and then take a taxi. And we are driving, and the college is not in the city. It's out in the 7th wealthiest suburb in the United States of America. And it's not new money like we see in Seattle. It's old money. And the houses just keep getting bigger. And the very first sign in town says this: Lower Merion, which is the county, Lower Merion Cricket Club, not golf, not tennis, cricket club. No coloreds or Jews allowed here. No coloreds or Jews allowed here. That sign did not come down until 2012. I want you to imagine being a colored girl in America in 1989 for the first time and seeing that sign. And having studied history, I know I'm in trouble. I know instinctively I'm in trouble. And I also know that if I call home and tell my parents about this sign, I am on the next plane home, and I have worked my whole life to get here. So I am not about to tell my parents, and I'm not about to go home, but I know I am afraid. And I had every reason to be afraid, because the next few weeks for me were about to be a living hell. First encounter I would have, my first day, I'm headed into the dining hall, and I'm so excited because all the staff there were black. None of the students were black, but all the staff behind the counters in the dining hall were black, every single one of them. And I was so excited to see black people. I was just introducing myself to everybody. Hello, I'm from the Netherlands. Hi, I'm from the Netherlands. And all of these people are just like I'm an alien. They just cannot figure me out. And then Big Mama, this was literally her name, Big Mama, who was the manager of the dining hall. This Big Mama was probably about 5 feet tall. Dark-skinned black woman with a wig. Big Mama pulled me to the side and she said, girl, you go to school here. You cannot be talking to us back here. We're the help. I said, excuse me? She said, you're paying to go to school here. We're the help. You don't talk to us. I can tell you're not from here. I will never forget that conversation. I did not eat breakfast that day. I did not eat breakfast. I was looking for my people, and the people I thought were my people, I was not allowed to communicate with. 2 weeks in to college at Bryn Mawr, a white woman walked up to me on campus, and she looked me dead in the face, and she said, you know you're only here because we have to have 10 of you. And I said, 10 of who? 10 of what? What do you mean? She said, affirmative action. You know the government only gives Bryn Mawr money because we have 10 of you here. And like a dummy, I walked across the street to the admissions office and made the director explain to me what affirmative action was. And this poor woman had to tell me, she's right, you're one of the 10. Can I tell you, just hearing that made me doubt myself and my potential for the first time in my life. I had never doubted myself until that moment as an academic. I mean, I struggled in classes. School was not easy for me, but I had worked my behind off my whole life And for the first time, I thought, oh my gosh, did I even earn my spot here? Now I know at 51 years old, I earned my spot there. More than earned it. But at 18 years old, thousands of miles and an ocean away from my family, I suddenly began to believe. So back to the panel conversation, because I heard y'all. There are so many stories that are out there that we have to overcome. There are people in our communities that have heard justice is not done for us. These systems are not for us. All it took was one conversation with a woman for me to begin to doubt. That window of doubt opened for me. But then the following week, I was called the N-word, screamed at me by two young white men in a Jeep driving down the main street, Villanova stickers all over the back. They screamed at me, N-word, get out of our neighborhood. We don't want any of y'all here. And I ran back to my dorm and had to call the operator to call my dad. I'm like, Daddy, somebody just called me the N-word. What do I do? And my poor, clear dad, all he had for me was, honey, you're not one of them. It's just a word, click. That's what my dad had. Because guess what? My parents weren't trained in how to talk about race. It's not that he didn't love me. But my white dad, there's not a word that you could use to my white dad that would make him feel like it feels for me to be called the N-word. He didn't know what to say. It's just a word, honey. It's just a word. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That's a lie, y'all. Such a lie. And here I am on campus by myself, trying to deal with, do I even belong here? I would be called the N-word so many times between then and January that I just stopped counting. Unfortunately, basketball season was right after soccer season, so I went from one field to a court. I averaged 25 points a game as a freshman in college. For the first time in the history of my college, we won every single game that year. Do you know my coach never checked on me when the season was over? Not once. He knew I didn't have money to fly home for spring break. He didn't check on me. I would spend days in my dorm room without turning on the lights, without going to eat. I know now I was depressed. I wouldn't have had words for that then. I did not belong. I did not belong. And then one day, at the beginning of April, right at the end of my freshman year of college, I had stopped going to class. I got my first C's and D's in classes because I just wasn't going. For the first time, I realized maybe I can't change the world. Maybe there's nothing good about me. Maybe my parents shouldn't have adopted me. Maybe this has all been a mistake. And one day in April, first weekend in April of 1990, something in me said, get out of here. And so I put my shorts and t-shirt on and I just started walking. And I ended up 2 little towns outside of my college town. And suddenly everybody there looked like me. Everybody was black. I was like, where have y'all been this whole time? Well, it turns out that's where the help lived. It's where all the black families lived who were the drivers and chefs and nannies for the people in my college town. And they lived in tiny little homes. But right in the middle of this little community was a beautiful outdoor basketball court. And there was a man getting ready to start a game on the court that day, and he yelled out so he could see me coming a mile away. He's like, girl, get out here. We need one more to play. One of our guys is late. We're trying to start. And you did not say no to him. I just knew this by the tone of his voice. Like, you did not say no to this man. So I was like, okay, I'm running. I have no idea. I've never played street ball before, ever a day in my life. I've only played organized basketball. By the way, there are different rules, okay? You call in your own fouls, which I did not know how to do. So I got fouled a lot. But I would play basketball with this man and his sons and their friends all day long, and the lights came on, and he took his boys home in a Mercedes-Benz, and I turned to these 3 young men sitting on the sidelines, about high school age, 15, 16. I said, who is that Jay guy that we were playing with all day today? This Jay man, you kept calling him Jay, and they're like, Dr. Jay? Like, how do you not know who that is? I said, I'm from the Netherlands, okay? And they were like, the Nether what? And I said, how do y'all not know where the Netherlands are? And all 3 boys said, we stopped going to school after the 7th grade. We don't know where anything is. And I said to those boys that day, I'm an 18-year-old kid. what is your dream for the future if you're not going to get a high school diploma? And all three boys said, we don't expect to live to be 21. Why would we dream about a future? I was done. Here I was, this kid who was depressed, who thought I could not change the world. And suddenly, those boys say that, and I realized, like this, I was born out of the body of a white woman for a reason. I was born with hair like this for a reason. I was born 6 feet tall and loving to learn for a reason. I was born in St. Paul, but raised in the Netherlands for a reason. I know I was made to be a bridge. And I know that every child in this country deserves to have educators who believe in them and who think they're amazing. And I would run all the way back to my college in tears. And again, you had to call the operator to call Europe. So the operator woke my parents up in the middle of the night. But I was determined. I got to talk to, and I'm crying on the phone. And I said, Mom and Dad, I realized for the first time how much you sacrificed for me, giving up everything you knew to give me a different life. Man, you all have been changing the world every stinking year you've been a teacher. And I never thought about it that way. And I know today how I want to change the world. I want to be a teacher just like you, but I want to teach kids who look like me because they deserve to have great teachers too. And I'm not coming home. I want you to imagine being an 18-year-old kid telling your parents you're not coming home. I didn't go home. I've been in America now for 32 years. Has it been easy? Heck no. Would I change it? Never. I started teaching in North Philadelphia, 100% black school. Out of the 1,000 children we served, 800 of them had no running water or electricity. Our school had no library. How do so many children end up in the court system? You got no running water and electricity. You got no books in your school. How are you supposed to learn and have hope to do anything? What's the point? I left there and moved to South Bend, Indiana, where my husband went to graduate school, got married there, and began teaching in South Bend public schools. In fact, if you've ever heard of a guy named Pete Buttigieg, he was in the 8th grade when I taught 6th grade. I should have gotten his autograph then, but I did not realize that little Pete was going to become mayor. Pete was going to become, right? But I have spent my whole teaching career working with mostly black and brown students, always poor students, the poorest of students in the country. I worked my way across the United States teaching. I don't regret 1 second of it. And it's been hard. And I would offer that what is happening in your court system is also happening in schools. So I so appreciate your words about narratives and stories that people hear. Even though you and the court system are not the police, here's what happens. If folks in the black and brown and indigenous communities have experienced anyone in authority in negative ways, they apply it to everyone in authority. They have to for their own survival. So we see the same thing in schools. I tell teachers all the time, white teachers, well, I'm a nice person. Why are they so mean? I said, you know what? For their own protection, they've seen other white people that they can't trust. You got to earn their trust. You don't just get it. You need to earn their trust. Guess what? I got to earn their trust too because I don't sound like them. I got to earn it. Now, fortunately, I could earn it on a basketball court. My first day of school every year, in my heels, I used to wear heels. Now I only wear Nike everywhere I go. So this is a Nike suit, by the way. It is. It really is. Every single presentation I give. I was going to wear my purple and black leather one, but I decided, y'all are court people. We're going to do the subtle black today. But I wore heels to work every day. Heels, and because I knew my students needed to see a different picture of what a black woman could be. And so I wore heels and suits every day. On the first day of school every year, I would challenge the best basketball player, the kid that thought he was the best basketball player, to one-on-one at lunchtime and kick his behind in front of everybody. Respect, okay. I could not afford to give that, so I may not talk like y'all, but I'm gonna kick your butt on the basketball court. But I actually had the opportunity to try out for 2 WNBA teams. As a teacher, I got invited at 28 years old while I was teaching middle school to try out for the Seattle Storm. They called me. It's kind of a crazy story, but they called me cold, and there's this woman on the other end of the phone who said, we'd like to offer you a tryout for the Seattle Storm. What I should have said is, do you realize I'm 28 and have 3 small children? But I didn't say that. I just asked her when are tryouts, and she said in 3 months, and I said, sure, I'll see you there. Click. Oh my gosh. What did I just get into? And so I'm teaching middle school at the time, and my mother-in-law calls me and she said, honey, I had the weirdest dream last night. I know this is weird because you're at home all the time, but I think I'm supposed to come live with you and help you take care of the children. It's like, oh, I think I'm trying out for the WNBA. And I would end up not just getting one tryout, but I'd get a second tryout. So on a Friday, I would try out for the Seattle Storm, and then I'd have to drive down the I-5, which is the worst thing to do on a Friday, to Portland to try out for the Portland Fire on a Saturday. At halftime, or halfway through the day at lunch, on the second day, I was ready to die. Okay, I'm ready to die because I'm 28 years old. I have just tried out for a professional team for 6 hours the day before, driven like a clown in a clown car with like 4 other players, like squid. Yeah, it does not feel good. At lunch, I was ready to just die. Just bury me underneath the rose garden in here, and I'll be good. Just bury me under the court. I'm laid out at lunch. And then something in my head said, Erin, average is just showing up. Great is doing the best you can, and you can give another 3 hours. Whether you get chosen or not, you can give another 3 hours. And I would finish out. I'm laid out at the end of the day, the last buzzer rings, and I literally, I have left it all on the court, literally. And I'm laid out, and suddenly there's a camera over my face and a voice. Erin Jones. Yes? This is NBA Live. Why? We'd like to do an interview. Why? I'm still laid out, y'all, on the court, on my back, sweat, I know I look like a hot mess. And he said, we would like to inform you, you are the oldest player with the most children to try out for the WNBA. So I did a little 15-second spot on being old with a lot of kids. And when he was done talking to me, this little tiny woman walks up to me and she says, Erin, I've been watching you all day. I said, I'm so sorry. It was not pretty. She said, nope. When you walked in, by the way, just fun fact, if you are a college player and you show up at a professional tryout and play even 1 minute, you lose your scholarship. Period. You have to give up your scholarship. So by the way, and I had learned that the day before. So I saw it as my mission as the mom, the OG. I mean, I knew I was older than everybody, but I also was a teacher. And so I was spying out the girls I thought were potentially college players and letting them know, hey, I learned this yesterday. If you don't think you have a shot here, I need you to go back. Leave the gym now. And I was able to save 3 girls who would not have gotten chosen, and they would have lost their scholarship, and no one was telling them that. She said, I watched you do that. I watched you make sure that everybody knew it was obviously you had done this before. She said, I watched you at lunchtime think about giving up. And I watched you find something in yourself. She said, I played on the very first women's Olympic team for the United States. And I'm taking a team of Americans to play against the Mexican Olympic team next summer. Would you be our player captain? I said, yes! Now, I probably should have asked Happy because we still had 3 little kids at home. But I was like, I'm going to Mexico. Now, what she didn't know is that I also spoke Spanish. So at 30 years old, I got to be the player, captain, translator for the American team. We played our very first game on my 30th birthday. At halftime, they let me share my story in Spanish. The entire stadium stood on its feet. It was an outdoor stadium, sang happy birthday. And when the game was over, kids lined up all the way around the gym to have me sign their tennis shoes and their socks and their t-shirts. It's the most beautiful thing. And I knew as much as I loved basketball, I loved young people more. And I knew that when I came back to the United States, I had to go back to teaching and kind of give up my dream of playing professional basketball. But when I got back right before school started. My cousin from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, who was a coach up there, called me. And what I didn't tell you is that even though my grandfather on my dad's side gave the blessing, my grandfather on my mom's side and my grandma did not. We had 0 contact with them. And my cousin on my dad's side called me and said, hey, I'm coaching this camp right before school starts. Would you come to northern Minnesota and coach with me? My girls need to hear your story. And I said, I will only come if you arrange for me to meet Grandma. My grandfather had already passed. He said, are you sure? I said, I'm positive. And so I would fly here and take that little propeller plane from never doing that again. Thought I was going to die. But we'd get to Grand Rapids, and I would coach camp that first day, and he would take me to her retirement home. Now, my mom's mom is about 4'10", so imagine me and her. And she greeted me at her door, and she had a shoebox in her hands. And she began to take things out of the shoebox. Do you know my mom had been sending her my school pictures? Every certificate I ever won, every newspaper clipping was in that box. And my grandmother says these words, Aaron, do you know you were the favorite out of all of our grandchildren? We're more proud of you than anyone else. We just didn't know how to tell you. Because you're the N-word. She used the with the earth end. She called me that to my face. Yes, in the same sentence, you're our favorite. And it felt like I'd been punched in the gut. And I said, Grandma, you can't use that word. And her response, what do I call you then? And do you know what I realized in that moment? Those of us that are 50 and older have been taught to not talk about race. So we suck at it. We suck at it. And my grandma sucked at it. And we lost 30 years of life with her, not because she hated us, but because she did not know how to talk to us. And here's what she followed that with. Can you ever forgive me? Your grandfather went to his grave and he never got to tell you how much he loved you. And I held all 4'10" of her in my belly button as we cried for about an hour. And I made a decision that day, I will be part of our healing. Because I refuse to allow other families to walk through this and other communities. Y'all, we suck at talking about race. We suck at talking about gender, sexuality, religion, and politics in mixed company. We suck at it. I don't believe we're any more racist today than we were 30, 50 years ago. I think we've been taught to not talk about stuff. And you cannot get good at what you don't practice. So I see myself as a coach. I'm not an expert. Y'all, there are a lot of NBA coaches that have never played basketball. They never played basketball, but they're expert facilitators, great motivators. That's how I see myself in this work. Do you know my grandmother would die 3 months after I saw her? And I think all the time, what if I had not tried out for the WNBA? What if I had not said yes to Mexico? Would my cousin have called me and asked me to come coach with him? Probably not. You are being asked to do hard things in your courts. I dare you to do hard things. And I'm going to invite you to 3 practices that for me are what make me able to, again, be in spaces that are mostly white. My husband is a large black man. Our kids are large. I am the smallest one in our house. I forgot when the pandemic ended and we were able to go outside, we got to Walmart one day and I looked at my husband and I said, I forgot how big we are. Because I'm the smallest one. But I have 3 practices that I really learned. The book that I wrote came out of the painful experience of watching people respond to George Floyd's murder in really icky ways. In my own family. I'll say it's a little emotional for me to be here because there are some people in my family that I cannot talk to right now because of the ways they responded. Man, if you black people would just listen to law enforcement. That was my aunt. If you black people would just listen. Anyway, so it's a little emotional being here because there's my aunt's son came to pick me up from the airport yesterday. We went out to breakfast. He was gonna possibly be here today. We had our first good conversation that we've had in many, many years. But I wrote the book out of a desire to bring us some healing. And I want to give you 3 strategies to close with today. I start every day with gratitude. And I want to invite you to a practice of gratitude. Do you know that when you make gratitude a habit, that means not just once a week, You can't build a habit once a week. You got to build a habit daily. When you are grateful every single day, and it's not the size of your gratitude, it's the practice of gratitude. So some days when you're having a really crappy day, it's the little things, just choosing to find something to be grateful for. Do you know that literally changes your brain chemistry? The dendrites in your brain will literally reform to create a positive neural network. I began to practice gratitude March 16th of 2020. Every single day I choose. I have a gratitude journal, I write in it. In your courts, when you have staff meetings, I want to encourage you, start with a gratitude moment. If there are too many of you, don't go around the whole circle. Have people turn and talk to a partner. If you're on Zoom, any meeting I'm on Zoom, we start out every meeting that I lead with Zoom. In the chat, everybody shares something you're grateful for. I am very disciplined about the practice of gratitude. Second thing, how many of you remember political correctness when it became a thing? Who's old enough to remember when it became a thing? Yeah. Political correctness sucks. Here's what it's done for us as a country. It taught us how to lie to each other. Because here's the thing I'll tell you. I speak 4 languages fluently. I also speak body language. There is nothing worse to me than hearing something come out of your mouth, but I can tell with the rest of your body you do not believe that thing. It's dangerous. So I don't believe in just saying the right thing, saying the thing you want me to hear. I also don't believe that's an open door to just be vile and inhuman. But I would invite us to something I call brave spaces, being brave. First of all, I don't think any space can be safe for everyone. I just don't think that's possible. And I don't think that's something we should desire. I want to create spaces that are safe enough to be courageous and brave. And brave means being vulnerable. I've modeled that today. Brave means pushing through discomfort. Modeled that today. Brave means getting curious about other people. Don't assume because how somebody votes or where they live that you know anything else about them. Get curious. Today I have a really dear friend named John who was raised in Hayden Lake, Idaho, the home of the white supremacist clan that was taken over by the FBI. His grandfather was the leader. Today, John and I are great friends because John reached out to me when I ran for office, and I chose to sit down with him, and he said to me, Erin, you're teaching me how to love differently. And today, a former white supremacist and I call each other brother and sister because we got curious about each other. Brave also means I don't do the shame, blame, guilt game. I don't ever call a person racist. I will call systems racist. I will say that action you just took has racist implications. I don't ever call people names. Having taught 12-year-olds, guess what? You tell little John he's stupid. Little John is no longer listening to you as a teacher. And if little John does listen, it's because I've now had to invest hundreds of hours of time to repair the harm that I did by calling little John stupid, even though y'all 12-year-olds do stupid stuff all the time. But I will pull John outside and say, John, I know you know better than this. What is going on with you today? Instead of, John, that was so stupid. Can I invite us to not play the shame, blame, guilt game? With yourself either. You were going to mess up and say the wrong stuff. I promise you, it's going to happen. Be kind to yourself too, and then choose to be kind to others. Last thing I want to invite you to, and I call this grounding in, we're not going to actually practice it for sake of time. When you feel your body getting anxious and you can feel your blood boiling, someone has said something or done something in your presence, instead of responding in the moment, I want to encourage you to just count to 10 or 50. Just pause. Imagine if every leader just paused before they spoke. Before you respond to that tweet, or that Instagram post. Just pause. I'm going to close with this invitation around that. I want everybody to put your hands out in front of you, even those of you on camera watching. I can see you because I'm a teacher. Okay, let's call each other in and up into the best version of ourselves, not out and down into shame. Let's try that again. Let's call each other in and up into the best version of ourselves, not out and down into shame. I'm going to challenge you to just pause the next time you get heated in a conversation, whether it's about race or anything else. All the stuff that I have learned and that I talk about applies to how we think about all the identities, gender, sexuality. We cannot get good at these things if we're not willing to practice. So I invite you to practice. I invite you to get curious. I do have a book that I wrote for this purpose, and there are only like 15 copies left. But I have a free study guide with the book because I'm a nerdy teacher, and I want to really help. I'm not going to get rich on this book, but I can help people. So if you are interested, please just reach out any way that I can help you. If you have children, I have 3 TEDx talks. They are all appropriate for young people to watch. I want to be part of the solution. Are you willing to be? Thank you.
Clearly, I'm much shorter. I gotta. Thank you, Erin, for just a phenomenal session. To wrap up this conference and kind of move us into our annual, I encourage you all to continue to have those difficult conversations that Erin was talking about and be the bridges in our courts for our communities. Also, on behalf of the NACM board and our president, Jeffrey Sunakawa, I would like to thank you for joining us at our mid-year conference here in Minneapolis and virtually. I want to give a shout out to our conference staff. If you are in the room, you can stand up, but I wanted to thank Erin, Val, Jude, Stacy, and Francine for all the work that you did leading up to this conference. I'm going to give them this. They're not in here, but they can watch it virtually later. And before I wrap it up, I want to encourage you all to get involved in NACM. If you're not on any of our committees, we're not scary people. We're very approachable. A lot of us board members will be here after the conference if you want to ask any questions about our community or our committees. You can even just jump on the call and lurk with your camera off. Nobody will call you out or anything like that. In your conference app, before you leave, just make sure you're rating our sessions and our speakers. That helps us make sure that our educational content continues to just get better and better. If you participated in any of the core sessions, make sure to go back and do your structured response test to get credit to be the core champions. And you'll also receive an evaluation post-conference. If you could finish that, that'll also help us out. We hope you can join us in Tampa, either in person, because it's going to be a lot warmer than it is here in Minnesota. I'm from North Dakota, so this is like a heat wave. I'm not wearing a jacket. It's glorious. But the annual conference is July 9th and 13th. So again, thank you, safe travels, and have a great rest of your week.